Welcome to today's webinar brought to you by Sandhill Consultants. I'm Stephen Fagg, Director of Database Trends and Applications and Unisphere Research. I will be your host for today's broadcast. Our presentation today is titled A Framework for Sustainable Data Governance, Key Tools and Best Practices. Before we begin, I want to explain how you can be a part of this broadcast. There will be a question and answer session. If you have a question during the presentation, just type it into the question box provided and click on the submit button. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible, but if your question is not selected during the show, you will receive an email response. Plus, all viewers today will be entered for a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card just for participating. Now, to introduce our speakers for today, we have Robert Ludden, Vice President at Sandhill Consultants, and Jeff Giles, Principal Architect at Sandhill Consultants. Now I'm going to pass the event over to Robert. Welcome to the broadcast, Robert.
Hey, Stephen. Many thanks. It is a pleasure to be here. I thought I'd just quickly start off with, from a high-level point of view, talking about Sandhill's reference architecture and how it actually illustrates the integration of our products and services to show a unified approach to the Irwin data modeling, data governance, and data cataloging solutions. But also I thought I'd do a little bit more deep dive on the context here. So Sandhill has been in business for almost 30 years. And as frameworks have been developed, such as the DIMBOK, DCAM, and DMM, we have looked to incorporate their guidance into our offerings. Our team members, such as Jeff, that you'll meet in a couple of minutes, are certified in DCAM, DMM, and DIMBOK. And one of the things that we've noticed is that while these frameworks are absolutely outstanding, they tell you what to do, but not the actual how to do. And that's where Sandhill comes in. Sandhill has developed a data governance best practice framework or template or solution, let's call it an offering, that fits in the middle between the frameworks noted above and the technology, such as our technology vendor, Irwin, that provides clients with a set of instructions, templates, and allows an organization to create and increase their data governance maturity. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to actually have Jeff come in and do a little bit more deep dive on the actual complexities of data governance and how we can actually help resolve some of those issues. Jeff.
Thank you, Robert, for that overview. Let's start off by talking about the complexity of data governance. It's no real secret that data governance involves a lot of complex interactions. You've got people who play certain roles. Those roles perform certain activities, all to get a certain outcome. And those outcomes need to be managed in order to conform to a standard or expectation that the business wants. So if you look at this diagram here, you've got red, black, gray, and blue hexagons all sort of nestled next to one another. Each one of those facets integrates with another facet, and you can see that all of these different things have to interact together in order to establish a good governance product or program. Where does data governance in the larger data management scope, let's say? In the world of data management, data governance is viewed as kind of an overseer or supervisor of data management functions. Data management itself involves things like doing data quality, metadata management, data architecture, master data, and other related functions. But if you see the overlap there between the two areas, data is the common, what we call lingua franca, or the thing that both elements are dealing with. So data is at the intersection of these two data management areas, right? And it is the agreed upon definitions for the metadata standardization, quality control, risk mitigation. These are the things that we have to agree upon in order to get a good data product out the door. So let's take a look at the top part here, the data governance capability section. And if we look at that oval, it's really broken down into several different functions here. So there are many different definitions for data governance. There's like a whole host of different ones. But basically, if we break it down, we're talking about making data useful for the business, because that's really what the outcome should be. The data is available and the business uses it. So what is useful data? Useful data has usually some kind of accountable party. It should adhere to certain policies and standards. It's understandable and it's well communicated. So if you look at these different boxes inside of here, you can see that you have some sort of data governance authority. So somebody needs to be accountable through some structure. There are policies and standards which we have to adhere to make sure that the data is good. Somebody or playing some role has to be responsible or accountable for this data. Then there's the actual governing of the data. You know, how do we manage conflicts between, let's say, definitions, or how is change managed when we make changes to data? Then, of course, we have to communicate all this stuff to other parties so that everybody understands what's going on in your data governance program. And all of these things together sort of develop into a data governance knowledge base. So all of this stuff should be accessible to any individual that wants to understand how it works. And then below, there's a certain workflow of how the data governance operations are managed. And workflows are critical because we need to understand who is approving what and what status is it. So now let's take a look a little deeper in how the data management part sort of comes in here. So now when we look at this, we're looking at another component. So this would be that data management bubble that we just looked at. And when we start looking at this, the association between data governance and data management is bidirectional. You can see that there are arrows connecting the two. Data governance provides the guidance on what are the expectations for the data, but it doesn't explicitly say, well, how are you going to do data quality? How are you going to do metadata management? That's usually left up to data management. But if it fits the specifications or conforms to the norms, that's the part where data governance comes in, because that's the agreement where we all sort of understand that this is what that data means. This is how we name that data. You know, this is where I can find that data. So when we start working between these two areas, what we can see sometimes is that decisions need to be made about data, but we move them up into data governance, where we have people who are stewards or data owners that have sort of the business knowledge or technical knowledge, depending on what we're talking about, to make a decision about what is to be done with this data. So that's the integration between the data governance part of things and the data management part of things. So what we at Sandhill looked at after working with these things for many years is that there's always a certain path to establishing a data governance program. And usually it's quite confusing and daunting. And one of the biggest questions that people generally have is, where do I start with this? You know, you need a set of guidelines to provide some information on what to do, a framework to organize all these roles and policies, responsibilities, and other things. And so you really need a kind of a jump start to sort of get the program off the ground. And that's really what we're talking about with this thing called Compass. So let me introduce you to Compass. Compass follows a cycle from planning through to execution. And then once it's running, the ability to monitor it to make sure it's sustainable, it's on track, ongoing. So Compass documents the required data governance functions and artifacts for a data governance program. And it's template driven, and it's hosted in the cloud. So it's really nothing that anybody needs to install locally on their machine. And many of the templates that are actually in here are already predefined with some content, such as there's policies that are already in here. Now, obviously, we can't know exactly what policies that an individual company wants to have. But from a data governance perspective, there are usually some basic ones, such as data security, data access, and a few others that are really part of any data governance program, regardless of what industry you happen to be in. And they can be customized. So any, let's say, predefined content that you might want to modify, you can add or change depending on your suitability for your current situation. So if we look around this wheel, you can see that there are things like architectural things about definitions, organizational things like RACI and role and party, process and task things such as workflows, change management, data stewardship things like authority, accountability, performance monitoring like dashboards, how well are we doing with the data governance program, and then finally content and templates where you can modify and create your own templates to build out your data governance program. Now, a word about Compass, in that Compass itself is not a substitute for a data cataloging tool. There are plenty of data cataloging tools out there on the market, and I'm going to show you one in a minute, that do a very good job of doing things like storing artifacts or linking and syncing things together and doing lineage and that kind of stuff. They're very, very good at that, but what they don't have is any kind of content. So if you were to purchase a data catalog or a data governance program, it's usually empty. There's no stuff in it. So things where Compass doesn't do is, even though we talk about this idea that there should be a business glossary and we give you all the qualifications for building one, we don't actually store terms and manage terms. That would usually be something that a data cataloging tool would handle for you. So those two blocks that are in blue are really the domain of data cataloging and business glossary tools. But what we talk about mostly is the content that you're going to use to make these tools give you the best benefit. So let's jump into this a little bit and talk about how Compass is kind of organized. Starts off with a framework. So as I mentioned earlier, framework organizes the various components of your data governance program. And Compass uses a fairly simple structure, basically 3 different phases by 9 governance areas. And you usually progress from the left, right to the lower right. So the upper left to the lower right. And you'll notice that above there are certain integration points. So we're talking about data governance here, but there are integration points with other data management areas like architecture and data quality. These areas we're currently working on, so they're really outside the scope of data governance in this Compass demonstration. But we're continuing to expand the breadth and depth of Compass to integrate these areas in the future. So a little bit about what the content looks like. So when we talk about governance, one of the key areas of any data governance effort is the planning of the structure of accountability. Most data governance programs have kind of a multi-tier approach to accountability. Each layer has a different area of decision-making, such as enterprise level, business unit level, data domain level. They might have different names like a committee, a council, a stewardship team, but this is where you basically start figuring out how are we going to manage things and based on who has what authority inside the data governance area. Next, we're going to take a look at setting up the governance office. Now, it's optional to set up a data governance office, but a data governance office is a key resource for both the business and IT that need to allocate data governance resources. So if you think about it, it's almost like an intermediate area between the business and IT. Some organizations like to take data governance and put it completely inside of IT, which isn't really the best way to do it. And some just make it purely business, but having a data governance office kind of puts it right in the middle. And so then you can start to allocate data governance resources like data stewards and various things for the projects that will be going on within the organization. So what does Compass do for you here? It guides you through certain considerations that you need to evaluate when you're deciding how you're going to allocate resources and how change management workflow is going to happen and those types of things. The next part is looking at your data strategy. Now, data strategy is generally based on what your business strategies are going to be. So successful data strategy should be aligned with any business drivers, goals, requirements that you might have. And the data governance is supposed to support the business by converting those business needs into data governance objectives. So if we said, for instance, well, we have different business units and we want them to share data, but right now we're having a trouble sharing data because, well, people name things different things. So then what happens is you sort of translate that particular business need into an objective such as data integration policy or something like that. So these objectives are generally detailed as major components of something like a data governance charter, which is, okay, we're going to have a data governance office. We're going to have certain data governance structure. We're going to have certain roles. We've got people who are going to play these roles. And at the end of this is to be able to say that once the data governance program is operational, the business should start to receive some benefits from its existence. And so where does Compass help you here? Compass provides certain templates and guides for developing, let's say, a charter type artifact. And of course, the heart of data governance is policies and procedures, right? So when we start looking at this, data governance policies, they form the core of a data governance program. So the policies are basically a documented set of guidelines that ensure that an organization's data and information assets are managed consistently and used properly, right? So this is part of the governing part of data governance. These are the statements of intent that say the data has to conform to these particular guidelines. Now, Compass has within it several key data governance policies. I just mentioned a couple of them that you can modify to fit your objectives. So I think last we had somewhere around 30 or 40 different policies in there that you could configure and modify to suit your particular industry that you're working in. And of course, when you're going to set up a data governance program, it is critical to actually train these people up, make sure that they are skilled in data governance. So a solid data governance program will require well-trained staff to support it. So one of the big things that happens with data governance is they sort of roll out data governance, but they don't train anybody. So the effectiveness suffers due to the lack of training and understanding. Nobody's sure what they're supposed to be doing. So both the technical and business knowledge workers should have a basic understanding of data literacy. Integration of data governance with data management tools should be established before you operationalize your data governance program. And of course, after that, you really have to start looking at the accountability part of things within your data governance program. So that's usually some sort of RACI concept. So the two most important role assignments in the data governance world are whether you are accountable or you are responsible. So if we don't have any accountability, there's no way to determine if expectations have been met because nobody's evaluating and vetting this data. So nobody is really accountable for anything. And without responsibility, there's no way to assign work. Nobody is actually doing the work. It's great to have a data governance program, but if nobody's doing anything, well, then it's not really useful. So it's usually defined as a kind of a RACI matrix. It's the most popular method for tracing responsibilities. So Compass provides some guidance for creating RACI assignments, as well as providing templates for building up your own RACI matrix. And we have full descriptions of the scope and the purpose and a matrix where you can assign the RACI specification. And of course, workflow is very, very important. So when we look at workflows, we are really looking at two kinds of workflows, mostly in data governance. That is the workflow for change management and a workflow for compliance. So change management, simply saying change has happened. Somebody has to review the change and validate the change so that we can document that the change happened. The compliance part of it is, okay, well, I have got metadata here or a definition of something. Certainly it fits the scope of the intent, but the quality of it is not conforming to what we're expecting. So compliance just makes sure that it conforms to what we want. And that can also be defined within certain templates around process. So it's one way to say that we need to have change management. It's the other part is to say, well, how do we actually do it? So we have to describe it as either a narrative or some sort of a swim lane flow chart that explains or defines how that's going to happen. Now, Compass has within it some predefined workflows for policy and standards compliance. So that is to say that the artifacts within Compass can be managed by Compass itself. So if I take, let's say, a policy and I modify that policy, I can't just say, okay, well, this is the new policy. It usually has to go through some sort of review process to make sure that we all agree. The important part is we all agree on things. So I would have to actually take my own policy and push it through Compass's workflow to make sure that that policy itself has now been accepted as being compliant. Next part is the actual project plan. So in data governance, you can't have a program unless you have a project. So you actually have to have a data governance project to start off the data governance program. So we need to know what are the tasks, approximately how long might those tasks be, what order should they be completed. And so if I can lay these all out, I can get some approval for these particular tasks, because obviously I have to assign people to do certain tasks. So we all have to agree to the order and the duration and the resources that can be available for this. So you can do this in Microsoft Project, or you can do it in Mind Manager. You could even do it in Excel. But Compass does have a Gantt chart that you can use, which is sort of pre-filled in with information from the framework and templates, so that you sort of get a kickstart there to start building it. Now, of course, once you have your project becomes the program. So now it's running. You want to make sure that this is going to be sustainable over time. One of the key things that kills most data governance programs and data management programs as well is that once it's running, nobody ever looks at it to see how well it's running. So eventually it sort of decays and nobody's monitoring it, and it sort of becomes one of those things that we're supposed to do, but nobody ever really does it. So once it's operational, you're going to want to know how well is it performing. So Compass provides some dashboards to monitor the status and progress towards your data governance goals. So these things might be how many issues are sitting in queue that have not been resolved. So if I look at that and I say, okay, well, it looks like there's a lot of issues, but who is accountable for this particular thing? I'll actually be able to go find the accountable person and say, how come there's a huge backlog? We want to start to address these things before they become big, big problems. So what I'm going to do next is kind of show you a kind of an overview, a quick overview of Compass, so that you can get a general idea of how it works. So bear with me for a minute while I spark up my screen here. So as I mentioned, Compass itself is basically a web front end. It's a cloud instance, so the only thing I really have to have on my machine is a browser that's JavaScript compliant, which they all are these days. So there is this idea that you have to log in, not just anybody can get in, so I have to have the appropriate credentials. Once I have the appropriate credentials, this is the framework where we have got a plan phase, an implement phase, and a deploy phase.
Sorry,
so
Jeff,
if I start looking at...
Jeff, just to, sorry to interrupt. I'm still seeing the slide, but are you showing your screen, your browser?
There you
go.
Am. Is it showing now?
Seeing it?
Oh,
it's showing now. Yeah.
My apologies for the 7-second delay. I start talking before it starts showing. Okay, so let me rewind here just a short bit. This is, well, actually, let me rewind a little bit more. I'm going to log out to log back in just to show you that there's a login system. So you log in to Compass this way, then you're presented with the framework, and there's the 3 different phases, and there's 3 areas within each phase. So when I start off looking at, let's say, the data governance authority, here's where we start to look at things like I mentioned before, the executive charter. It's just an artifact or a deliverable that you're going to want to have, which specifies, how data governance is going to work, what you hope to achieve by that, and what kind of benefits the business should be able to get out of it. Now, the template part of things here is that each section within the template is collapsible. So I can collapse and expand certain areas within this template. I can also go into an edit mode and edit anything within this template. So there's a full editor for the text within this area. And if we scroll down, there's sections for descriptions. One of the things that you'll see is part of Compass in all the different templates is this thing called a context diagram. And a context diagram basically says that this thing here in the middle, that's basically a process. The process requires inputs in order to get outputs. So what needs to go into creating a data governance charter and what should be the outputs of the charter. Controls, these are the things that might limit or constrain what you can do. And of course, resources, who needs to be available in order to work on this particular thing. Anything indicated in red here is sort of hyperlinked to different sections within Compass, as well as the Compass's glossary. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump into this part here called Business Glossary and just show you how template works. Within Compass, obviously we don't manage all the business terms, but we do give you some guidance on how you can qualify a business term and determine its suitability. You can see here that there's a functional view of inputs to qualifying a business term and the outputs to getting a qualified business term. The template itself is completely collapsible, so you can show and hide different areas. And there's an edit button, so you can come in here and modify this template in any fashion that you like to make it more suitable for how you want to work with it. There's this area of RACI where you can determine what kind of stewardship level might be accountable or responsible for the business glossary area. So with that, because my microphone cut out, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump out of Compass right now and go back to the presentation and talk a little bit more about data management. So hang on. Let's jump back in here and start talking about this intersection between data governance and data management. Okay, so what we had been discussing before was this whole top part, which was data governance and how Compass comes into play where it has got content to help you with, let's say, a data cataloging or a data governance tool. Now we're going to talk about this bottom part here, which is the actual practice of doing data management and using some cataloging tools to help you get that done. So first thing we'll take a look at is that whole area of business glossary. So most all data governance programs have some kind of a business glossary. So it's usually one of the first questions that business users ask about data is, what does this mean? I mean, I'm looking at this thing, but I really don't understand it. So usually the business glossary will define the meaning of all the business terms so that you can better understand what it means, so that when you see it, you can use it better. So this particular dashboard is showing metrics on number of terms that have been submitted versus number of terms that have been accepted into the glossary. So I can have an idea of how this glossary is functioning. It also shows who might be the steward, who might be accountable, or who might be responsible for the business glossary. The other part deals with things like compliance. So compliance basically starts to say that we have different facets of data management. So we can have compliance around business. So business compliance might be regulatory restrictions. Technical compliance might be naming standards. Do these things conform to certain naming standards? Operational compliance might include data lifecycle rules. So compliance reports help manage the sustainability of the data management efforts. So you can run reports to see basically what's the status and how are we doing. The data dictionary part of things starts to look at the technical specifications. So the technical specifications is really just what is the technical abbreviation for customer? Is it CUS? Is it CUST? Is it CSTMR? So the data dictionary is going to help us understand what are the technical specifications for all the data that we store. It's also going to help us with things like privacy tags. Like we store information in certain places. What is the level of privacy for the entire database or a particular data element within that database? The next part is really talking about governance and responsibilities. So when we do governance, we obviously need to know who is responsible for the work, who's accountable for the data's suitability as an asset. So this diagram shows stewardship and ownership relationships to the data domain within their particular control. So if they basically are looking at customer data, or are they looking at product data, or some sort of area of data. Now, this is more or less showing you that there's information in here, but you have to understand that when you purchase most of these data catalog products, this stuff doesn't come pre-populated. You would have to look at something like Compass and say, how are we going to set up the structure? How are we going to define, what are the critical data elements? What do we have to go into thinking about what is a critical data element? So, I'm showing you built with information, but know that they don't come pre-built with any of this stuff. Now, the next section is actions. What is it I have to do? So if I log in and I'm a data steward and I'm responsible for product information, there might be different systems I have to look at. There might be definitions I need to review. I need to basically, make sure that I'm dealing with data lengths. Is it too long? Is it not long enough? So this is like my giant to-do list of things that I need to get done within the scope of data governance. Next thing we'll look at is data access rights. So obviously data security is super important part of data management these days. So you have to have a data security policy, and you need to know what are the procedures and how we do data security. So it's one thing to have a policy that says that this data must be secured. It's another thing to say we also have to have the step-by-step procedure or some narrative that defines how we're going to do it. So those things need to be aligned with data governance And so this data, this diagram more or less shows you by role, who has access to what data and what level of access do they have. The other part is supporting documentation. You'll find that sometimes there are ISO standards which define a lot of information. And I don't really need to keep all that information inside of my data catalog. So I need to be able to sort of either pop out to where I can find that or store that PDF in the back end somewhere. So somewhere to store some supporting documentation. And then finally, when we get to the end, is to understand what is the lineage. So when we think about lineage, which is kind of important, if the data glossary defines what does the data mean, and the data dictionary defines the technical specifications of data, data lineage is kind of like the glue that connects the what does it mean to what did you name it and where are you storing it, which is usually the three general questions that need to be answered for most data governance efforts as well as data management efforts, because ultimately people want to audit information from the source to wherever it travels, as well as understanding what does it mean and how is it related to certain things. So hopefully this next demonstration will go better than the previous one. So I'm going to do a quick jump over. I'm going to do a check and make sure that my audio is good. And hang on while I do that. Okay, I'm going to do a test. Can you hear me?
Jeff. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
This is going a lot better already. All right. So what I have here is Irwin's Data Intelligence. A lot of the concepts I'm going to talk about are in lots of data cataloging tools. So it's not really specific to just the Irwin Data Intelligence. I just happen to be using this product. But understand that the concepts are similar. So obviously you have to, sign in and validate yourself so that you can log into the system. So when I log into this particular system, based on my role, I'm placed in the glossary area. So when we look at this, there is a series of different business glossary terms. So within the business glossary terms, you can think about different ways to catalog or organize these things by parties, people, product, regulatory compliance, work effort, finance, agreements. So you can set up your own custom way that you want to organize these things in the business glossary. But the business terms themselves need to be associated with certain business policies. So I might have data access policy. If I look at my data access policy, I can see that there are details about the definition of the policy, the actual statement of what the policy means. Does the policy ever expire? Are there any tags that are related to this? Who specifically is the person that's responsible for this? And also notice that you can actually pop out to something like Compass, and you can actually go right to the policy itself. So the policies are important to understand. The compliance reports that I talked about, these are the things that are going to help you make sure that there's sustainable effort going on. So in this one, there's a compliance report around policies that don't have any governance responsibilities assigned. So if you remember, I talked about it's great to have a data governance program, but if nobody's doing the work, it's not really working. So policies that don't have any associations with the business, policies without definitions. So again, there are lots of different compliance reports that you can run to make sure that it's a sustainable effort. And then business rules. These are usually things that might be around process. How is a business term approval process work? What is the data access approval process? So these are the things that we want to understand about how do you do stuff. Because remember, data governance does not tell you how to do it. Data governance just says that you need to have data access and it needs to be managed. But I'm not going to tell you exactly how you get it done. So these things more or less tell me how I'm going to get those things done. So this is the data governance part of things from the process of the catalog. Now, if we look at the resources that you need for doing data governance, there are role players and there are people assigned to roles. So there's an area where I can define all the people, and there's an area where I can define the roles. So I can say that you can have a business data steward, ETL developer, any kind of role that I want, and I can assign an individual to it. So if I had a business data steward, then I could say that the business data steward has certain permissions to do certain things. So the business data steward is a glossary manager in this case. And then if I look at access rights by role, then I can see details about, okay, these are all the different data assets that that particular role and role player has access to. And then I can look at the governance responsibilities to say, okay, well, I have certain people that play certain roles, such as a business data steward. And then maybe I want to know reports on data stewardship from the responsibilities perspective. So now I can start to look at things in terms of who is responsible for what. So I can expand, I hope. There we go. So my business data stewardship, so this would be an organization. This would be a particular role player or role within the organization. This is a person who plays this role. And this person playing this role has got to manage business terms, business policies, and business rules. So that's what the business data steward manages. So I can look at this information quickly, get an understanding of what is the structure, who is going to be doing what within this particular informational area, access rights report. So now I can say that we have access rights, so roles with assignments. So when I start to build out a data governance program, I have lots of roles defined, but I don't necessarily have people assigned to do the role. So if I looked at this and I saw that there was a 0 in here, I would say, okay, I have a role, but nobody's doing it yet. So if nobody's doing it, then it's not actually being done. So I need to understand all of this information. So I need to look at the different access rights and what are they? What can they get at? What systems? What glossary terms? Those kinds of things. Those all help. The other part is looking at the data dictionary part of the world, where we're looking at the metadata that comes from different systems and is stored in different databases. And this sort of formulates that data dictionary for me. So these things might be my different systems, like a commercial loan system or a customer management system. And then there's information that's stored in these different systems. And the details about what does it mean, what is its length, its domains, etc. They're all in here. Because you can see that sometimes there's some cryptic names that are associated with things. And I need to know what is the business name that's associated with that as well. So this is actually the technical data dictionary side of the thing. So now I want to bring it all together. I need to understand from a data dictionary perspective, as well as a business glossary perspective, how all of these things sort of fit together. So I'm going to jump back quickly to my catalog of glossary terms here, and look for a term and look at how it's related to all the different things that we just sort of looked at. So I can search for a term, and that term, hang on a sec while I dump that call. Address with 2 S's, and I can look at address. So now I have an understanding of what the term means, and it can have a certain classification as PII classification, has certain tags, United States, location, and the actual definition itself. But what I want to know is, how does this business term, which tells me what does it mean, related to all the other component pieces of data management? And so that's where this lineage comes in. And we look at this idea of address. So address can actually be broken into two parts. On the left-hand side, this is your technical business, not business, but technical information about systems and things like that. So I can look at commercial loan system, and then from within that system, I can see that there's commercial loan data, and from that data, there's a database which contains some record of information that relates to address. On the other side of address, I could see what is the policy that's around address, and there's data security policy that's related to that. And so I can understand that there is a meaning to address as well as some rules that govern it. If I expand everything out, we can see how all of this sort of fits together with the different systems, which is in the data dictionary world, and then information around business terms, which is the what does it mean part. So when we ask the question about address, which is what does it mean, we can see that address could be a facility or a location, and it could be postal address. But address could also be a kind of party communication. So we could have electronic address as well as party postal addresses and contact addresses. All of these things are all kind of permutations of address. So when we're looking at what does it mean, we can look at all these different parts. Now, what standards are associated with an address? There are standards for the United States Postal Addressing Standard. There's also an ISO 11779 metadata standard that goes along with this. So this stuff helps me understand. This part helps me say, what did you name it and where can I find it, right? So I'd have to look inside RETL 10 to find information about address. So it will tell me essentially where I can find the address. So that helps me answer those questions. So what I'm going to do now is pop out of this and then go back to my share here. And at this point, I am going to pass it off to you, Robert, to finish up.
Thanks, Jeff. And we will go into question and answer in a couple of minutes. We're of the time. But hopefully, as everyone knows, the quality of data used in any enterprise is of paramount importance, now more than ever before. Therefore, we understand that data must be used as accurately and as complete and as timely as possible with good integrity. And that requirement is something that shows that data must be governed through policies, through enforcement, and through monitoring. In our opinion, the most crucial step is establishing the data governance practice, which is the foundation for data governance success. And so hopefully what we've shown with both Compass and the Data Intelligence Suite, that both tools can assist in the rapid deployment, operation, and analysis of an organization's data governance practice. Our offerings together enable organizations to define their strategic goals by understanding what the benefits are to data governance, why data governance matters. It also, and hopefully you've seen it, how we demystify the steps in the data governance program by guiding the user along the path and allowing them to customize and implement and deploy their data governance program. And it also enables the client to monitor and control the effectiveness of their data governance program. We believe that by following the steps contained within Compass, executives, businesses, and IT leaders can and will improve the data quality, reach their business goals, and ultimately avoid the costs associated with bad data. So when we looked at this, we understand that establishing and creating a data governance program is not an easy task. Jeff talked about it at the beginning of the presentation. However, by adopting Compass, we have produced an offering that shortens the time to implement a data governance program by a factor of many, many months, Basically, we did a comparison. If you take everything that we provide in Compass, the current estimates are that in order to build an entire program, you're looking at a year plus with 14 members, and fully loaded cost will give you at least a minimum cost of $250,000. Whereas adopting a platform like Compass, you can get started in a very short period of time, and the costs are really cost effective for implementing that. So we just wanted to highlight that. Also, we thought we'd leave this to the end. Stephen, for your listeners, Sandhill is one of the very few partners that have developed practice and offerings around Irwin's, now Quest's, core data modeling and data governance products. We have been in the business for almost 30 years now. And, obviously, if people have or are looking at creating a data governance program, looking to adopt, a data cataloging solution, then obviously we would like them to reach out to us. You can contact us at the above contact details. And also, I will mention this, Stephen, just before I pass it over to you, that Sandhill is looking for organizations to help us advance the implementation of their data governance management system. And if you're interested, we believe we've got something to offer you. So reach out to the contacts you see on the screen below. So, Stephen, with that, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thank you very much, Robert and Jeff. Okay, so we're going to dive into questions from our viewers. First question, Jeff, can you define RACI? You had mentioned that before during your presentation.
Yes. My apologies. I made the assumption that everybody understood. R stands for responsible. A is accountable. C is consulted. And I is informed. The letter A, accountable, is the topmost thing. So if you're accountable, you are basically the end of the line. Everybody comes to you. Responsible is you have been assigned the work. So you're responsible for getting it done. Consulted is, of course, I need to talk to a SME or somebody to consult with them to make sure it's correct. And informed is probably where we'll let management know that we executed it and we're done with it or we did it. So that's RACI.
Understood. Thanks, Jeff. Next question. Can you discuss some of the required artifacts? For example, data dictionary, activity, entity, CRUD.
Sure. So when doing data governance or data management, there are certain artifacts that you need to either construct or reports to understand how things are going. So from the data governance perspective, the basic things that you need to understand is what is the work that we're going to do? Who is going to be assigned to do the work? How do we manage the work that we're doing, that is governing? And then how do we report on the how well we're doing? So the artifacts are usually something like, as I sort of mentioned, I don't know if you could hear me, but there's this concept of a data governance charter, which begins to describe all of those things. There are things like data dictionaries, which usually is up to things like a tool. Business glossaries are tools. And then some lineage or some way to connect the what does it mean to what is it called, so that when we want to do audits or do some sort of traceability or do an impact, I'm thinking about changing a policy. If I change this policy, what terms are affected, what artifacts, things within the glossary or the dictionary are affected.
Understood. Next question, how do you handle the complaint that if I follow all your standards and procedures, it will slow down application development?
Well, that's the part where we need to separate the concept of governance versus data management. If all of the standards are published, the developer should know ahead of time what's expected. So that means that they just need to follow the standard. It takes a little while to get used to doing data governance. So there's some sort of a cultural shift that has to happen. But the thing of it is that if you think about it, you can spend time up front or you can spend time on the back end. So when I say spend time up front, it is researching and understanding what the policies are, what the standards are, what the data is supposed to be. Now, if you do that, then it's easy to find data, understand data, trace data. If you don't, then on the back end, when somebody says, can you tell me all the systems that are using customer? And it turns out, oh, one system calls it customer. Oh, this one calls it buyer. Oh, here it's called a consumer. Oh, over there it's called a shopper. Oh, well, now I have got to spend even more time trying to figure out what's the difference between all of these things. Whereas if I employ governance up front, that task or activity is actually easier on the back end. So you don't actually save any time by not doing the governance stuff.
Got it. Thanks for clarifying that, Jeff. Next question. How does Compass assimilate all the different frameworks?
Well, there are some commonalities across frameworks. So if you think of things like the DMM and DCAM, both of them have an area called data architecture. Now, DMBOK actually separates out data modeling from data architecture. But if we think about data architecture and data modeling together, they are similar, and they deal with things like metadata management and architecture. So there's some similarities across all the different frameworks. Everybody comes at it from a different point of view. If you look at the DMBOK, they look to put data governance in the middle like a wheel and connect everything out. DMM and DCAM just consider it just another module or sort of an activity that you need to do, or in the case of DCAM, it's a capability that you do, but they don't position it anywhere. But data governance exists across all of them.
Understood. I know we're over the hour, but one more question, and it's from me. If there's one thing you'd really like our viewers today to walk away keeping in mind, Jeff, what would that be?
I would say to have a good general understanding of the value of data governance and how it's useful to the business.
Understood. And Robert, anything you'd like to add to that?
No, except that, data governance is something that is becoming more and more standard for the smaller organization to the larger organization. So we stand ready to assist and enable clients with the Sandhill offerings. And Stephen, on behalf of Sandhill, would like to thank you for moderating the call today.
Well, I would like to give a big thank you to both you and Jeff for coming on board, sharing your insights and expertise. Once again, folks, Robert Ludden, Vice President at Sandhill Consultants, and Jeff Giles, Principal Architect at Sandhill Consultants. That's all the time we have today for questions. But as I mentioned earlier, we will follow up with your questions over email. If you would like to review this presentation or send it to a colleague, you can use the same URL that you used for today's live event. This will be archived, and you will receive an email once the archive is posted. And if you would like a PDF of the deck, you can go to the handouts section on the console once that archive is live. Should be up tomorrow afternoon. Also, as I mentioned before, just for participating in today's event, you could win this $100 Amazon gift card. The winner will be announced on July 29th. We will reach out to you via email if you are the lucky viewer. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon.